Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're going to be looking at the 1965 episode, The Time Meddler. We're going back to the black and white era for the first time in this podcast.
We are too. How exciting.
It's our first Doctor episode. And also, curiously, this is actually the first Doctor episode I've ever watched all the way through.
How do you feel about it? Just first impressions. I'm so curious.
Oh, I really like this episode.
Huh. Cool. I have some mixed feelings about it slightly, but we will get to that.
Yeah, no, me too. But like overall, I think this is like a really, really charming episode. I think it, it's about for the time. I imagine this is about as grand as an episode has been. We have shots of the open ocean, Viking ships and all that stuff, and I think from what I've heard, it's also the first time that the show has really blended history with big sci-fi futurism, especially with a Time Lord in the mix.
Yeah, I
just
think
from my
so.
sparse research, I think it's a big move for the show.
You could say maybe that the Dalek invasion of Earth was kind of bigger because that was a pretty grand story and it was 7 episodes long. You had those great shots of the Daleks emerging out of the water, which is kind of crazy, and you had a lot of side characters and black markets and underground resistances. But I do understand what you say when you say this has an epic feel to it. The shots of the Vikings, by the way, when they're sailing the boat, I went onto the TARDIS wiki just to find some interesting facts about this episode. Those shots were taken from they were stock footage from a documentary the BBC made about historical reenactments of Vikings. So that was interesting.
I kind of figured that they weren't original shots. It's it's like 5 seconds of the episode for them to go to all that work to get that footage on their own. It would be way too much, especially because it certainly didn't look like they were using a set or a green screen of any kind. So
yeah, and you can tell, like, even with the film stock, it's being filmed, I think, with celluloid, whereas everything else is being filmed with 60s video cameras.
So on the timescales, this has an 8.1 out of 10 as an average score.
I'm slightly surprised it's that high. We'll get to why later, but I guess I can kind of see why. This episode does have quite a reputation, as far as I know, so...
Sure, yeah. It's interesting that it has basically the exact same average score as Father's Day from last week, because they're very different episodes.
Yeah. They are very, very different.
It has an 8.1 for plot.
Yeah, like, I can't fault the plot itself. It's certainly not like, Legend of the Sea Devils or something. Like, the plot, like, it's there, it's clear, you understand what's going on, and it's relatively hitting all the emotional beats that it wants to.
Well, it also does a good job of setting itself up as well. Like, there are enough foreshadowing elements throughout the first 2-3 episodes that really hook you in, and when those answers come, it all makes enough sense anyway.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of nice foreshadowing, and creating this pretty interesting mystery, which is, quite good. At seeing sort of the fabric, or the fabricated nature of the monk's plan sort of slowly unravel when you hear the record scratching, for example. Just things like that sort of help set it all up, which is quite good.
Yeah. It has an 8.5 for acting.
I
mean, for the time.
Look,
the main cast are good.
They're pretty good. Well, yeah, okay. So yes, the main cast are good. They're good. What they're specifically trying to achieve, given this is 60s Doctor Who, and you kind of have to sort of get used to the rhythms of it. Given that that's what they're doing, yes, the main cast are pretty good. Side characters not amazing, they're not great, but I can relatively forgive that. Again, simply because it's just part of the world that they're creating here. So I wouldn't put the acting overall that high, but the main cast are pretty good. I'll say that.
It has a 7.7 for effects.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's nothing again because you expect classic Doctor Who to have like really bad special effects, but this isn't like the Web Planet, for example. There's a lot of historical settings and costumes. They've probably been taken from, I don't know, BBC's Shakespeare department, I guess. But they all work for what they're trying to do. I mean, I know that the monk's TARDIS, for example, it is the Doctor's TARDIS. It's just been raised slightly on a platform, but it's fine. It works pretty well. Um,
There's no effects in here that stand out as
as
you know.
really bad, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think for the time, especially, it holds up very well.
Yeah, yeah, like they're using a lot of the more sort of spectacular elements sparingly. The fact that you do have that one shot of the Vikings rowing the ship, but that's stock footage is, in my view, actually a pretty clever way of doing it. Um, so yeah, I certainly can't think of again. There are no Web Planet moments where I think, wow, this looks fake as shit. Um, I wouldn't honestly probably mind it if that was the case, but yeah, I can't think of any um majorly unconvincing moments of special effects here. So yeah, fair enough.
It has an 8 for replay value.
Um, yes and no on that. I found some elements of it better than the last, but the problems I had with the first time watching it were a bit more pronounced. But we'll get into that later on.
Mm. I could see myself watching this again. Like I said, I had a good time with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to see how you're going to react to this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the first time we've looked at the first Doctor stories, all ranked up.
Yeah.
As in, like, how we always do our, in terms of other.
Yeah, compared to, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there are 32 first Doctor stories.
Yep. Sounds about right.
I have to assume that. Oh no, it's just classic stories. So stuff like Twice Upon a Time isn't on here, for example.
Yeah.
3 Doctors is and 5 Doctors is. So technically there are 30 first Doctor stories.
Mm-hmm.
Time Meddler is ranked 5th.
Again, I may not. I do have some problems with it, but again, I'm not surprised because, again, I know this has a bit of a reputation. I think I read in the TARDIS wiki that when Doctor Who was turned 40 years old, UK TV played a bunch of classic series episodes each week throughout November. It's kind of that was one of the major moments of how I fell in love with Doctor Who, incidentally. But I think they got fans to vote on what stories they wanted to see, and this was one of the first Doctor stories that they chose. I think it was this and the Keys to Marinus and the Daleks. So I'm not terribly surprised.
Keys of Marinus is actually kind of low on the list.
Huh.
It's the 10th worst rated out of 30.
Huh.
And the Daleks is pretty close. I may be
getting that factoid wrong. Well, in any case, yeah, the fact that it does have that reputation, I'm not hugely surprised, but
also 10 out of 81 people say this story requires a previous. I agree, because for the first maybe 10 minutes or so, I was very confused as to what was happening in the TARDIS.
Yeah. Yeah, even I was a little bit. I did have to look up, what was the continuity here.
It didn't help me being not especially familiar with pre-Joe Grant companions, especially.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, okay, so there's Stephen, like, so they know this guy, but he's only on the TARDIS for the first time now.
Yeah.
What?
Can you just do me a favor? Could you check what story came before this, if you can?
Yeah, it was The Chase.
Oh, of course, The Chase. And by the way, at some point we're definitely gonna have to watch that episode because, man, there is some very classic Who isms that show up in that story. I'm pretty sure, and again, I know I've talked about this before, but the documentary, the Dalek tapes, there's a bit where Nicholas Briggs is talking about this story, and he calls it a blind alleyway of Dalek development, and he's like, fans just basically say, oh yeah, so that really didn't happen, really did it, because I'm pretty sure there's one scene where one Dalek says, set coordinates to whatever in the Ranger voice, and I'm pretty certain that the other Dalek responds with, uh, or all righty. So I don't know
What?
what they were doing.
Why wasn't this the first episode we reviewed for the podcast?
I don't know. I didn't have the courage to suggest it, but we will definitely have to
That's
take a look at it.
amazing. So you mean it's sort of like how we sort of choose to ignore a lot of the Dalek lore that was established in The Witch's Familiar?
Yeah, yeah, basically.
Kind of like that?
It's so that story. Pardon me for the digression, but like it's quite strange because I'm pretty sure the episode is basically about the Doctor rematerializing in a bunch of places, but the Daleks always managing to find them, and so they have the whole thing. That's why they call it the chase. They go to all these weird places. I think they go on a pirate ship. They go to a weird it's like it's like a horror theme museum, but there are people there that are like robots that come alive, and there's really hammy acting. Have you ever heard of the mechanoids?
Yeah, here and there.
That this is where they first appear. They go to a planet where the mechanoids are, and they've got weird robot voices, and they've got flamethrowers, and they're rolling around doing shit. So we are definitely gonna have to watch that story at some point, and it's 6 episodes. So I'll be
Oh my
interested to
god,
see.
yes.
That's gonna be so wacky. Yeah, so we're definitely gonna have to be looking at that at some point. But anyway, um, yeah, that makes sense. That's where Steven shows up. I think it says on the TARDIS wiki at the end of the chase, he just stows away on the TARDIS. So,
Okay. I kind of
and
figured it was something like that.
Vicky came from another episode, which I haven't seen it in years, but from memory, it was a pretty good one called The Rescue, where they rescue her from this planet that she's on. It's only 2 episodes actually, that story. So, interesting.
Alright, so here's your synopsis, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
The TARDIS arrives on an English coastline in the year 1066. Exploring, the Doctor discovers that one of his own people, the Monk, is conspiring to wipe out the Viking fleet and thus allow King Harold to face the forces of William of Normandy with a fresh army at the Battle of Hastings. The Doctor succeeds in thwarting the Monk's plans and leaves him trapped in England.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yep. So, is this the first time, or one of the first? Well, it's bound to be one of the first times because it's only season 2 of the show. But this has got to be one of the earliest occasions of a villain trying to change the timeline, right? At the very least, at like a micro level like this, not in the sense of like we're going to go back in time and
destroy
invade.
Earth or something. Yeah.
But this is the first time a villain has tried to like change the timeline in a small way to affect the future, right?
Yeah, I think it. Yeah, I think it probably is. I can't remember any other, time meddling stories. It's probably, why it's called the Time Meddler. So I think, yeah, this would probably have to be the first, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story that we'll see again many times in the future. And it's just as effective here as it would be in the future. I'd like the fact that the Monk has seemingly altruistic intents, but like the fact that it's kind of like a mass murder thing he's gonna do.
Yeah.
That's the main reason the Doctor's like, okay, no, we can't have that.
Yeah, and I think even just the idea of messing with the timeline on that scale, like it's
definitely
that's such a insane thing to do.
Oh yeah.
And it's never explicitly stated, but it is heavily implied that this guy's a Time Lord, which is interesting.
I'll also ask: is this the first time we've seen a non-Doctor Time Lord as well as Susan? Like,
yeah,
have we seen other Time Lords before, or is this the first time?
No, I'm pretty sure this is the first time. Yeah, like they ask, does he come from the same place as you? And he says, yes, I'm afraid he does. So yeah, I think this would have to have been the first, other Time Lord that the Doctor came across. Because again, I don't think Time Lords, that concept didn't get introduced until the War Games, which is the last the story of the Second Doctor. But this is the first time that we see another person who is a Time Lord, even if we find that out sort of retroactively. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that they waited this long to do something like that. Of course,
yeah,
we
it is a
still don't
little.
get a lot of that lore until later, but
Mm,
I think because the show until now was very uh, split down the middle of whether it wanted to be like a purely historical show or a purely sci-fi show. The fact that this is the first time that they're fusing the two, I think this is sort
mm,
of a statement of intent about what the show would eventually become. So, I mean, in a
mm.
way, it's kind of groundbreaking.
Yeah, it is a bit sort of melding because I feel like again having the sci-fi trappings hidden within the historical trappings, I feel like that had been done in Doctor Who before, but I think this is probably the most pronounced that fusion had become. And I think it's just interesting to see them kind of come together here. It's funny, but I'm pretty sure like the original intent of the show was meant to be educational. It was meant to, I think, be educational for kids about science and history. To see them kind of melding them both together in this story, I think, as you say, is quite groundbreaking. Having said that, and we will get into more detail about this, I do find, there are definitely flaws here that are quite particular to the classic series, as I've said, sort of classic Whoisms. Um, but I wonder if that's because the original intent was it was meant to be educational, and that's kind of maybe getting in the way of some of the storytelling. It's not like really bad, but it does stick out for me a little bit.
Yeah, well, there are moments when the Doctor will step aside and explain to himself the history of this period.
Yeah, exactly. Like the bit where like the monk and him are talking, and the monk's like, "And as you know, Doctor, in the history books, the Vikings came and fought, the Saxons, and I'm going to stop that from happening." And the thing is, I'm not even against someone explaining a bit of history because, yeah, I mean, especially if you're not from the UK, you're probably not likely to know a lot about the Viking invasion of 1066, so that's fine. But Doctor Who would prove that they can integrate that sort of dialogue much more smoothly than in that scene. It could have even been a situation where like Vicky or Steven says, "Oh, I'm not very familiar with this period of Earth history," and the Doctor's like, "Oh well, you're about to see a great moment. The Vikings are going to come, and there's going to be a great battle, the Battle of Hastings." And so they could have done it that way, but they didn't. They literally just had this frankly kind of awkward bit of dialogue where the monk has said, "And as you know, Doctor, in history, and it's funny, but and again, I know this is the only first Doctor story we've looked at, but I am pretty sure that those sort of strange moments of dialogue happen quite a lot in the first couple of seasons of Doctor Who, where
I'm
you'll
sure
have
they must.
yeah, well, like where you'll have characters say, "Oh, where are we going, Doctor? Oh, we're going through a time bridge. We're going through a time bridge, Doctor. Yes, yes, child, we're going through a time bridge. Well, why are we going through the time bridge, Doctor? Because we have to go back to the time bridge to the other time before. We're going to the time before, Doctor. Yes, I already said that. So these weird bits of dialogue that just kind of creep in. They don't bother me terribly. They are quite charming and quaint in a way, but it's impossible to completely ignore them. So, yeah, I just wanted to point that out because there are other moments where it happens too, like when I think when Vicky says, "Oh, wait a minute, these places they always have secret passageways," or then later when they find the monk's TARDIS and Steven's like, "We can go in." It just again, it's kind of it is a bit on the nose for me. Having said that, it's not like on the nose in the same way that the dialogue in Legend of the Sea Devils was. It doesn't terribly bother me.
Yeah.
Um, and I actually noted that when I watched this because I watched it a second time, that second time those elements, they actually felt quite charming to me. They didn't annoy me nearly as much as they did the first time, and I think it might have just been a case of me just sort of getting used to the rhythms of classic Who again. Um, and like in a way, I'm glad we did choose this story because it shows what classic Who is. especially this era of Classic Who, kind of warts and all. Yes, there are definitely flaws, but it's such a good case for, what the show is. It gives you such a good flavor of what Classic Who is. So again, these
Yeah, well,
these
I think
strange little quirks, they don't, I can't sort of let them totally slip by, but they don't bother me hugely. But I thought, yeah, I'd just raise them. So
no, that's fair enough.
mm,
Like, that kind of stuff doesn't bother me all too much, even
mm,
on my first time watching it. I think
mm.
largely because, uh, you know, especially for the time, they couldn't show as much as they would have liked to. I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so I'm sure that if the scene you're referring to, where they open up the sarcophagus and
mm,
go, oh, we can go inside this thing. I'm sure if that were made today, you would be able to have a shot of from their perspective where they open up the sarcophagus and we can see
and they
into
just
the
enter.
TARDIS
Yeah,
and they just walk
yeah,
in. Yeah, you can't really do that
yeah,
with this. So like, just having the doors open, it might imply to an audience that maybe there's something in there they're going to take out.
mm,
But before you actually see the interior, them saying we can go in, it has you going,
mm,
oh wait, really? And
mm.
then in they go. It's like, oh my god, it's a TARDIS. Which incidentally, one of the better classic Who cliffhangers I think we've seen so far.
Yeah, it's pretty damn
Just
good. It's a very famous
yes,
one, and it
especially yeah,
works
especially
quite
especially
well.
knowing that this was the first other Time Lord that we've seen in the show.
Mm,
This has got to have been very very out of nowhere for the time, and
yeah,
like even I who knew who the monk was going into this, found myself going,
mm,
oh yeah, yeah,
yeah,
good, good.
yeah. And it shows again. I say, this is a very, very classic Doctor Who story in the sense that it gives a good flavor of what that era was like. But again, despite some of the narrative quirks, those taking those risks, that's kind of what Doctor Who, even in this era, did best. And it's really good to see them doing something wacky and strange because I don't like. I'm sure there may have been other TV shows and movies that did maybe in terms of the narrative beat something similar, but it's such a twist in a show that's already strange as it is. To see them really take that risk, it's really really satisfying. Especially just
Yeah.
and to have that as the cliffhanger of an episode. It's really cool.
I suppose this is a good chance to talk about the monk himself. So he would go on to become a semi regular villain. He appears in one other TV story, and I think that's it. So I'm not sure about regular, but he does come back after this.
I admittedly was not aware of that. What story was it?
I think it's the Daleks' master plan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Huh.
Um,
We'll probably,
yeah,
unless we decide to review the audio of it, we'll never do that episode.
yep. It's a shame
Looks
because it's the second highest First Doctor story on the timescales.
That's not surprising. It's also the longest. It's 12
Yep.
episodes. Went for 3 months.
Oh damn, those are
And
some
also,
good ratings.
wow,
37 10 out of 10s, 36 9 out of 10s, 31 8 out of 10s.
that is fucking brutal.
Might
Yeah,
have to
I've heard a
listen
lot
to
of
the
good
audio.
things
This
about
is
that story.
seems like a
Yeah, we're gonna
masterpiece of a
we
First Doctor
should at some
episode.
point actually. I own that audio as a vinyl record, which is interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Um, yeah. Um,
But here, the monk is not what I expected.
mhm,
It's interesting having him, like, at the very least, on the surface, seeming like he's just having some fun for a lot of
mhm,
it. Like he's almost having a bet with Da Vinci that he can do powered flight. Um,
mm,
and here he's trying to thwart a Viking invasion for
mm,
what seem to be good purposes. Although he kind of implies that a lot of the advancements that could be made would be under his guide. Maybe it is kind of
mm.
like a I'd like to take power in England kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's an interesting enough character here.
Yeah, there's quite a lot. There are a couple of layers that are quite good. Because when he's introduced in the Watcher, he seems kind of ominous, but then he moves to just kindly old monk. But then he's got another layer of him having this scheme, but then there's another layer of him having actually kind of a fun sense of humor. The fact that I don't know if he literally says it, but he basically implies to the Doctor he's basically really enjoying himself running around, messing with time. It's very funny because I think I said to you that the reason why I wanted to look at this story was because it would be an interesting parallel to Father's Day, because they're both about messing around with the timeline. But it is kind
Yeah.
of funny showing what the Doctor, and by extension the show, is willing to let go, because the bit where he says, "Oh yeah, I showed Leonardo da Vinci these." Like these plans to make a flying machine. I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. And then he says, "And do you really think that those rocks at Stonehenge would have moved themselves without my anti-gravitational thing?" I'm like, okay, we're doing this.
Well, I find that line especially interesting because we later learned that Stonehenge was used to mark the location of the Pandorica, which ends up being a trap for the Doctor, laid by
Hmm.
all of his greatest villains coming together in an alliance. So I kind of like the idea that like this other Time Lord was contacted by the villains to be like, "Hey, we need like a monument to remember where we put this thing," and him going, "Oh, I know how to do that," and then he started moving all these stones around. And they just went, "Hang on, is this all necessary? Why go to this extent?" I kind of
You
like that
know,
because there is that the fun of this being such a long show is that it will occasionally reference something twice, and
mm,
that kind of shared history when you can put two and two together. I don't
yeah,
know. It
is
makes for
always
some
fun.
fun thought experiments like that.
Yeah, and even if it's not super deliberate, it's still fun to notice those continuities. And I think it's a shame in a way, and granted, it's been ages since I've seen Pandorica episodes, but I assume Stephen Moffat didn't like delve into that terribly. Like he didn't say, "Oh yeah, it was the monk who did this," but it's kind of a shame he didn't, because that would have been interesting to see in a modern um, Doctor Who episode, I think.
Well, especially considering at that point there were no Time Lords left, it would be
Mm,
weird to reintroduce one, especially like at such a like if it was just a loose reference to this monk character, it would leave a lot of fans who didn't know the monk. It would be very confusing and out of
mm,
place.
mm,
And then if you were to
mm.
make the monk a more pivotal figure in that story, it would just open up a huge bag of worms.
Yeah,
So I can understand why he didn't. I don't think it was something that he thought about that much. I don't think when he was
yeah,
penning the
probably.
episode, someone slid a
Yeah,
note across his table going, 1965's The Time Meddler might have something to say about this plot, Stephen Moffat. I,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
small. I
Stonehenge. That's
just.
only famous because of Doctor Who.
Do you know that Stonehenge isn't a henge?
No,
I
I
don't have time
didn't.
to go into it, but there's a very specific definition of a henge, and Stonehenge
Hmm,
isn't one of them.
fair enough.
Um, what I was gonna
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
I love the fact that the monk has a literal checklist for his plan.
Oh yeah,
That is,
that we see it.
it's so deliberate, but I love it so much. I think it just
Yeah,
plays into the
it's
idea of
very
him just
funny.
having fun with like
Yeah,
he's just journeying through time to have a bit of fun, so that and then
yeah,
he makes a checklist like, okay, this one's a bit more intricate. I can't just have a beer with Da Vinci and go, oh, how about
yeah.
this? I need to really set this plan up. I'm not used to
And
doing this. I'm
there's
used to just depositing some cash and running away for a few decades. Oh, I know.
yeah,
I'll lay it out in big, thick detail on a gigantic parchment, not just a small slab of
yeah,
paper or anything like
like a
that I can keep in my
massive thing.
pocket.
And it's very funny, but again, this kind of goes back to that being a very classic Who-ism, or at the very least, I can't imagine that being done to that extent in a revival episode, but it
Oh,
still really
definitely not.
works. And not, I mean, it's charming and it's funny, but it still works with what they're trying to do in the world that they're trying to create. So it's really nice to see sort of those sort of details, and it also, you could argue, it kind of points to kind of an egocentric element of the monk, that he's
Yeah.
so, it's like, I'm a really important person in history and I'm going to write this plan and I'm going to remember it. It's going to be a memorable moment for me, and maybe even decades into the future people are going to find it and think, wow, this was all written out. It was all planned. How spooky. So there's something very, very funny about that.
I also like the idea of because like his the checklist ends with him meeting King Harold, But there's
Yeah.
there's stuff after that he plans to do with like guiding England into the future. So I just love the idea
Hmm.
of someone finding the parchment and just going, okay, so step number 8 is meet King Harold. Right, read me step 9. Oh no, sorry, it ends at step 8. There's no step 9. Oh, so did he do all of this just to meet the king? Surely there were better ways, right? Like,
Hmm.
this seems a bit intricate.
Hmm.
Like,
It is quite
I want
funny.
to meet the king. The first thing I need to do
Hmm.
is set up an atomic gun on a
Mm-hmm.
cliff.
Yeah, the particle beam, yeah, which is
And like, if you weren't aware of how the timeline was meant to go, that would be a very weird thing to find.
it is very funny that like when I was reading that list, it starts with, I mean, none of it's really normal stuff, but it's like, oh, okay, mess with the Viking fleet, um, like I think is it was, disguised as a monk, and but then it just goes set up particle beam, and that's just so jarring to go from history to sci-fi in that one moment. It's very funny. I also really like the fact that the monk has clearly an affection for 20th century Earth, and the funny thing
Yeah.
about that was when I watched this the first time, I got slightly concerned. I'm like, do I 100% believe that? Like, wouldn't he be using like some sort of really futuristic sci-fi tech, which it's not inconceivable for Doctor Who to do even at that point. Like, they, the props workshop probably could have worked out some sort of weird sonic, um, you know, like a radio device or something. But no, it's literally a record player that's getting to the end of its loop. So I thought, does how convincing is that? But the fact that later on, Stephen and Vicky find his collection of 20th century Earth artifacts, sort of that fixes that element for me, and it's a really good moment because it's very much a show don't tell moment. They don't have to say that he's got an affection for 20th century Earth artifacts, but the fact that they're showing that sort of contextualizes the whole thing. So I really like that part of the story. It
Well,
was handled quite well.
it's interesting that he refers to 1960s as the modern day. I
Well, I mean, then
hmm.
it would have been, but yes,
Yeah,
it's
but I mean,
is a little
surely
odd.
it wouldn't have been for. But also, the Monk's collection has stuff from every era, right? Didn't they say that?
Yeah. Yes.
So like, I didn't like scan the collection, but I didn't see like an abundance of 60s tech.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. Nice. Yeah, because I said 20th century Earth. Yeah, no, it would go beyond that. Like, but Earth artifacts.
Oh yeah, it's all Earth stuff.
Yeah, setting that up, I think, works well. I quite enjoyed that, but I just felt because I really was expecting that the 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 sound of the monk chanting winding down. I was expecting some sort of malfunctioning bit of tech, and it turns out to be a gramophone.
A
And I
gramophone,
just
yeah.
thought it felt kind of jarring, but it was still quite funny. But the fact that they did that he's using all this old, well, not old, but Earth technology from various eras, I think is a very funny and quaint thing to do. Um,
Mm.
and even the bits where it's like, what are you giving him? Oh, penicillin. Oh, it's a medicinal herb, and it's like, oh, I should have given him a blood transfusion. It's like a blood what? Again, those little bits of sort of people monologuing those thoughts. That's a very 60s Doctor Who thing to do. Like even like very specific for this era for the first Doctor. And again, I think when I first watched the episode, I found that a little jarring. But once I'd gotten used to the rhythms of it and watched it again, I thought, oh, actually, that's kind of it's funny, it's quaint, and I quite like what it does. Again, with the world building and stuff. So yeah,
Um, let's discuss the Doctor in this story.
right.
So I know that towards the back end of his era, William Hartnell was having a lot of health issues.
Yeah.
Um, did that start around this time? Because
Um.
I realized that he was absent for basically all of episode 2.
Okay, so there's a couple of things to unpack there. So I did read up on this. The reason why he wasn't in episode 2 wasn't because of any health problem. It was because he was on holiday.
Oh, lovely.
So, and again, I
Okay.
love that because that's such a 60s BBC thing to do. It's like, oh, actor's on holiday. Well, we'll just write around it. We'll just say that he's gone. That's fine. Whatever.
Forget bringing up the contract or anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Nah,
No, he's gone. That's
he's Doctor Who, famously, not the Doctor. He's Doctor Who.
yeah. So yeah, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, like that. He was on holiday, and it's very funny that they did that. Um, Now in terms of like the health problems, I don't know all of that history. I think there were some things that were cropping up even at this point. So for example, I read in quite a good book which I unfortunately don't have anymore called I think it was in Doctor Who: The Legend, but it talked about what were called his Hartnellisms. So he would sometimes mess up lines, missay them. So the best example actually happened in the previous story. At the end of the chase, Ian and Barbara leave, and the Doctor references this in this story. But there's a line where he says, because he basically sends them, I think it's through like a time portal or something, and he says, "Do you realize how dangerous this could be?" And he was meant to say you could wind up like in the vast reaches of space, but he said the vast reaches of Spain for whatever reason. So I
Oh,
don't
okay.
know. It genuinely could have been a health problem because I know that he suffered. I looked this up. He suffered from what is it, like cerebrovascular disease, and he would have several strokes and would spend the last few months of his life in hospital, unfortunately. But I don't know if those problems sort of started to creep in, but it's certainly possible.
Well, I did
Um,
notice a couple of times in this episode there
mm,
was a he tended to stumble over his lines on occasion.
a little bit.
Yeah, I was that's why I was wondering if there was a health thing because that
Mm,
combined with his absence, I was like, okay, did it happen?
yeah.
Is it starting already? He's got a full season and a bit to go.
Mm. But no, yeah, it was because he was on holiday, which just
Yeah, yeah.
again I find that so funny that they just decided again they had the guts to just work around that in the writings. Yep, he's trapped in a dungeon. We're not going to see him for the whole episode. Here's some Vikings and the companions. Whatever.
We're gonna have the first episode cliffhanger be him getting trapped, and then we're not gonna see him again. And then the second episode cliffhanger is that he's escaped.
It's very, very funny. Um, I do definitely want to talk about the Doctor here because I find both the writing, but especially Hartnell's performance, I find it in many ways endearing, and I find it very, very, very funny because what he is essentially, he is a young person's idea of an old person. I cannot the way he performs this character and the way the character is written, it almost seems beyond parody. You know what I mean? Like just the way that he
A little bit.
speaks, the way that he enunciates the words when he's talking about what a howdah is, and he's like, it's a small what is it? It's like a small tent placed on the back of an elephant. It's just
Yeah,
it's so funny. And
yeah, it kind of is.
I'll be interested to see what you think about this because he is very grouchy. Let's be quite clear about that. And I wonder if it's one of those things where it's just an element that maybe just hasn't, I don't know, aged as well as it could have. Maybe it looks a bit jarring for modern audiences. But I will give Hartnell some credit here in that whatever you think of his performance, and I'll be very curious to see what you think of it. But I'm quite convinced that if you had given this to another actor, he they wouldn't have been able to sort of evoke as much sort of pathos as they are here because I think, and this could just be my interpretation of it, but I think even when he's getting really cranky, there's almost like a twinkle in his eye, like he's trying to have a sense of affection under it, and that makes him kind of more endearing. Combine that with what I do genuinely love about it, which is he's got this old man sass, which occasionally comes out in really funny moments I absolutely love. I think I actually laughed out loud at the moment where he throws the cup of tea in the monk's face when he's in the dungeon. I just thought that bit was really, really funny. So,
Yeah, it
and
was
even
really
then
good.
later on when he's getting sarcastic, where it's like, "Oh, what are we gonna do now, Doctor?" It's like, "Oh, we'll leave the monk a little note." It's like, it's that element of the Doctor fucking with people that you mentioned before with
Yeah.
Pertwee, but it's funny to see it here, even in this early stage. So,
Well, also how he's so willing to just say to Edith, I think it is. He's so willing to say, oh yeah, there's the Vikings are going to invade, and King Harold's going to do it, but then it's going to be a shame about when William the Conqueror comes to town or whatever he says there. Like
Yeah.
he's just willing to be so candid about sharing what he knows.
Well, it's funny. It kind of it touches on a couple of things we've sort of looked at before, because you could argue that that could kind of mess up the timeline because they're not really meant to know about that. But on the other hand, it's like that scene in the Sea Devils where the Third Doctor's like, oh yeah, Horatio Nelson was a personal friend of mine. So
Yeah.
it's just him just saying shit, and it's yeah. So again, so yeah, what do you think about the character and the performance? I'm quite
I
curious.
yeah, I really enjoy it. I think he's a good Doctor for this story especially, but I think
Mm.
William Hartnell, um, I I genuinely like his performance. I think he's really good in this role.
It,
It's easy to see why they gave it to him in the first place, and also why he's the reason the show is still on today. Make no
mm,
mistake about that.
yeah, yeah.
If he wasn't as good as he is, then the show would have been axed
Again, I just
after it wouldn't have made it to the Daleks. It would have got very
yeah, yeah,
combined with the low viewing figures after the
yeah.
JFK.
I was
It wouldn't
even
have had a future.
I was even watching just for the hell of it. I watched the first part of An Unearthly Child, and you can see he's got quite a commanding presence. But again,
Yeah.
beneath let's be clear, the pretty unpleasant grouchiness of him,
Hmm.
there's almost an endearing quality there, and there's a twinkle in his eye when he's trying to have a sense of affection for his friends, and he does have a really good sense of humor. And I'll give you an example of it. There's another episode, I think it's the Space Museum. There are two moments, if I'm getting my continuity right. There's one moment when they come across the shell travel machine of a Dalek, and then there's a later bit where you just see the Doctor poking his head out from inside the Dalek, just laughing at himself at
Yeah,
how funny he
I know
is.
that clip. Yeah.
But then there's another bit which, again, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's a Space Museum where he's being interrogated by this guy who's using like a mind probe to see what he's thinking, and he just straight up asks the Doctor, this really straight laced way. He says, "Now, how did you get here?" And the image that is being projected from the Doctor's mind is just an image of a penny farthing bicycle. The Doctor just sits there smirking and laughing at this guy. So again, that sense of humor is there throughout, and I think it's a key part of, again, the way he's written, but especially Hartnell's performance. And I think if you had given this role to a lesser actor, you wouldn't have been able to draw out those nuances. So, as you say, it's understandable why he was as popular as he was, why he helped kind of, got the show going. Because even that the episode The Unearthly Child, um, Ian gets really cranky with the Doctor. He's like, "You're treating us like children." And the Doctor's like, "Really? Children of my civilization would be insulted." Just he, yeah, I don't know. It's just his old man attitude of I can't deal with these people. I'm just gonna throw shade at them for 30 minutes. Fuck it. So yeah.
I think there are a couple of moments in this episode where it does kind of show its age.
Mm.
For instance, when the Doctor's, I think he's calling for Edith at one point, and he just yells out,
Oh
"Woman,
yeah.
woman!"
Yeah. Woman, come back here. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
That element of the sexism, I think, can be quite present, especially in not just Doctor Who, but specifically the first era. There's I think I've mentioned it before, but the YouTuber Davis made a video ranking the Doctors from least to most Tory.
Yeah.
Shockingly, Hartnell only came second most Tory. Peter
Hmm.
Davison was the most Tory, which is curious. Um,
Huh.
Yeah, well, to be fair, like it was made as a joke, like you're not meant to
Well,
take it
sure.
entirely seriously. But
Yeah.
even Davis says, yeah, this, Hartnell, he's just a product of a different era, and when he's being a bit sexist, and it's the same with other elements in Doctor Who that haven't aged amazingly, because there are, definitely some other elements in other episodes that show their age in this sense. I think the way I view these moments, and again, I suppose it varies from moment to moment depending on how intensely uh, ethically icky, I guess, the scenes are. But my
Yeah.
broad attitude to them is I can I can forget them, but I can't forgive them, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So now, having said that, and again, this is just my interpretation. Perhaps I'm missing something in my interpretation. Maybe there are moments here that I'm either forgetting or overlooking. I'm, perfectly willing to be proven wrong on that front. But for me, the sexism, it's there, but it's not as pronounced as, I guess, as it could be. Because as I say, for the most part, I think he's being quite an equal opportunity grouch. He definitely gets, I think, broadly just as shitty with Steven as he does with Vicky. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's fair to
that's how
say.
I interpret all of it. But
Speaking of the
mm,
companions, let's move on to that.
yeah, sure.
It's a fine enough showing from both of them, I think, especially because the Doctor is out of the action for a quarter of the
Yeah.
story. They
Yeah,
do
the fact
quite
that
a
they
bit
sort
of
of keep the plot going is pretty neat.
yeah. Well, they both do quite a bit of like work in working out the narrative. Piecing the puzzle together on their own.
Hmm.
They both have their own role to play. There are moments when Vicky shines. There are moments when Steven shines.
Yeah.
It's not a particularly strong episode for either, in my opinion. Like, it's not a
Mm.
spotlight episode, for
Yeah.
example.
No, it's
But
yeah.
they do their job and they do it well.
Mm.
And it's clear that, like I mentioned last week, that it's an episode where one companion could do the job, but it makes sense for it to be two.
Yeah.
Because if there's two of them, they have a chance to, you know, bounce opinions
Yeah,
off
bounce
each
off
other.
each other.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and they can actually chat about what they're figuring out, debate what's the best thing to do. They have
Yeah.
different reactions to stuff. It's a good chance for there to be two companions without overloading the episode with
Mhm.
plots, I think.
Yeah.
Um, I don't really have a strong opinion of either of them as people yet. I don't think
Mhm.
this is the right episode for that.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think it's not an episode that really defines either of them particularly well.
Mhm.
But again, it doesn't really need to be.
Mhm. Yeah, I think Vicky definitely has already had her highlight episode before this with the rescue, which is where she's introduced. Steven, I'm not sure if there was a highlight episode for him. Maybe in the chase, I guess, but we'd have to wait,
Mm.
until we actually watch that story. But as you say, I think they do they're fine for who they are and what they're doing. They help keep the plot moving along, which is quite good. And they have nice little moments. I like the fact that Vicky figures out, oh yeah, there's probably a trapdoor around here somewhere. That's kind of cool. And as you say,
Yeah.
I think you really do kind of need them to bounce ideas off each other, because the audience would probably be a bit lost if it was just one person. Like, I mean,
Oh
unless you
yeah.
wanted to do like first person narration or something like that. Um, but just having both characters in the space bouncing off each other, and sometimes one will come up with one idea that the other won't, and vice versa. So yeah, I think that they're pretty good. I enjoy them. Their performances are quite good. They're likable enough. Again, some of the dialogue I find is a little bit kind of stilted. Again, it's very much, oh, look at this thing, Stephen. What did you find, Vicky? I found this thing. Let's look at this thing. But again, I can broadly forgive that, because, as I said, once I got used to the rhythms of the fact that, again, this is first Doctor Classic Who, I actually quite enjoyed it. It was quite charming and quaint.
I also quite enjoy that for the first half of the story. Um, a lot of Steven's character, and by extension the Doctor's motivation, is just prove to this guy that it's a time machine.
Yeah.
Like when the Doctor's the first time that at the very least the Doctor's explaining the history of this era,
Hmm.
it's largely as a way to go, oh yes, this is all really exciting stuff. I can't wait to rub this in that Steven jerk's
Yeah.
face.
Yeah, that was funny. That was very funny. And they even started the thing where he doesn't like to be called Doc, which they readdress in the Five Doctors, and that one bit where they're in the TARDIS and Stephen's like, Doctor. I just
Yeah.
the companions and their, like, the main characters for me. This is where this story really shines.
Oh
It's
yeah,
all those
easily.
interactions. It's the interactions between the Doctor and the companions with each other, and the Doctor and the monk, which is great. Um, I want to address one smaller issue before we kind of move on to some of the broader issues I have with it. But
Yeah, go for it.
so there's a small moment when the Vikings ambush the Saxons and they're fighting. To me, the fighting looks quite fake.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but even on the first watch of this episode, I actually enjoyed it. I actually thought, oh, yeah, it's fake, but it's part of the old fashioned charm. And even beyond that, as I've said before with other classic Who stories, it's helping with the style. Like, this is the style they're going for. Yes, it's very the fighting is very mannered and theatrical, but that's because the show is mannered and theatrical. That's just what it is. And if a modern audience watches this and doesn't enjoy it or finds it frustrating for those reasons, fair enough. But for me, I can very easily forgive moments like that because they kind of help with the atmosphere, and I just really enjoy it. So, yeah, that's one small detail. Um, so I do now want to address some of the bigger problems I have with this.
Yeah, I know. Go for it.
I did enjoy this story, but there was a lot of times where I couldn't really fault it on major technical levels, but and I really hate to say it, I do, and I know, especially because I'm, the classic Who fan, but I was honestly kind of bored by a good deal of this story. Now, there was a part of it is because, again, there's that whole episode where the Doctor is missing, and again, I'm not even averse to them doing that. Um, I I might be a bit biased because I know what the context is for that, the fact that it was just on holiday. But even if I didn't know, I'd on principle think would still be comfortable with them taking that risk. But the really interesting bits for me are when, Vicky and Steven are trying to solve this mystery and find the Doctor, but they don't focus enough time with that. They focus too much on the side characters and the Vikings invading, and I know why they're doing it. It does help get the plot along because, they wind up sort of storming the monks' monastery, but it just was not holding my attention as much as I
No,
wanted to. Certainly not as
I
much as the other
definitely
stuff
agree.
in it.
I tend to agree there. Like a
Hmm.
huge chunk of episode two seems to be about getting the companions to the same level of knowledge that the Doctor arrives at
Yeah. And they could have done
throughout the
it
first
fairly
episode.
simply or quickly or something.
Yeah, like
Um,
it's a shame that they had to structure the episode this way.
yeah.
But like we mentioned that the third episode cliffhanger is,
The
the
monks
monk
got a
has a
TARDIS.
TARDIS.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need that almost at the end of episode two.
Oh,
You need to
absolutely.
you need to get to that reveal significantly earlier on,
Absolutely.
so you can actually explore it in the last half of
Yeah.
the story. I think that like the episode, the story rather, it's got a good beginning in episode one.
Yeah.
Like they establish that the monk has some kind of future technology and that
Yeah.
they've got plans and there's some Saxons nearby.
Hmm.
And then I think it sort of dips until about halfway through episode three when the
Yeah.
Doctor and the monk start to like properly interact.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I feel pretty much exactly the same way, and I'd been wanting, like, ever since I watched the story in preparation for the podcast, that was the first thing I was going to say, that the cliffhanger of the monk having a TARDIS, that needs to be at least an episode earlier. I would
Yeah.
honestly be pretty comfortable with this story, even if it was probably like 2 episodes. If it was just in Viking Saxon fighting land, monk doing mysterious stuff. Oh, monk's got a TARDIS. I honestly could have enjoyed that. And it's funny that the episode 3 is called a Battle of Wits. I'm like, yeah, fuck, this is it. This is the exciting part where we can see these epic, parries and jabs between the Doctor and the monk getting into this sort of verbal boxing match. But there wasn't heaps of
No,
that. There was
doesn't really
more.
happen. No.
It wasn't a battle of wits. It was like an actual battle because I'm pretty sure that's when the Vikings ambush the Saxons and the fighting really starts. So I'm like, not sure if it's a battle of wits. That more happens. It does happen in the back half of that episode, but it more happens in episode 4. So
Yeah.
the reason again why I say that the characters are the best part of this episode, this story, the main characters, but we just needed more of them. Like I wanted
Yeah.
the episode, the story actually starts for me pretty strong when they're all in the TARDIS. I love it. I love the chemistry between all the characters. It's funny. It's endearing. We get to see the Doctor being a crotchety old, you know, curmudgeon, and we get to see the companions sort of pushing back against that. And even at the end, like right at the end, where it's like, oh, yeah, thanks for taking us on as crew of the TARDIS. And Vic's like, he's the crew, we're just the passengers. I find that quite funny. But we're just not getting enough of that. We're just getting these long stretches of people playing Vikings with unconvincing Nordic accents. We've got, Saxon peasants doing something. And even
Yeah, I
then,
couldn't.
those side characters, they are the most interesting when they're interacting in particular with the Doctor. But it's mainly
Oh yeah,
because they're giving the Doctor someone to bounce off of, and there's a nice clash in those sort of
I couldn't give
personalities.
less of it. I couldn't give less of a shit about that one Saxon who is convinced that the Doctor and his crew are Viking spies, and is hinted at early on that wanted to be the leader of the Saxon crew,
Yeah,
and then wasn't. And then like I was expecting a thing where that one Saxon aligned with the monk in order to overthrow and like gain
yeah,
control of the clan or anything
yeah,
like that. There wasn't anything like that either. He just
yeah,
got injured and then was basically non-existent for the rest of the story.
yeah. It's and again, it's a shame because when it's good, it this excuse me, when this story is good, it demonstrates for me what I love about Classic Who, that they are taking really interesting, strange risks, that they're doing really odd, wacky things. Again, having that cliffhanger of the monk's got a TARDIS, that's a pretty bold thing to do, and and even though like you could say that Revival Who takes quite a lot of risks too, and it would probably
Hmm.
take similar risks, but I think it's important to point out one of the reasons Revival Who is the way that it is because it has this backdrop of a show which, even if it in its infancy was taking the risk, it was paving the way and sort of putting all these stepping stones for Revival Who to jump off of. So I'm glad in that sense that we have looked at this story because, again, even though there are quirks or even, well, frankly, problems with the narrative that I have that just you can't kind of look past them. Um, Even for that reason, it's good to look at it to understand again what this show is and what it's about. But when the show is good in this story, it is really good and really interesting, and they do it quite well. And it reminds me again why I love Classic Who because it is willing to take these strange risks and do these wacky left of field narrative turns. So yeah, that's broadly how I feel about the plot, at least.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you.
Mm.
Um, I was going to ask, at what point did they establish that a TARDIS had a layer of consciousness or life?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Because I was watching the climax when
Mm.
the Doctor was kind of fiddling with the TARDIS
Mm.
console, and I was like, "Uh oh, is he going to deactivate the monk's TARDIS? Uh oh, if the show later establishes they're alive, this might have accidentally become like a really out of character thing for the Doctor to do because of retroactive lore that they
Mm.
revealed." But it ended up being a really, really clever way of utilizing the technology that they had to make the console appear much smaller than it
Yeah,
was.
which is very
Shrink
funny.
the dimensions. I quite like that
Yeah,
resolution.
that I
But
don't know. I think there's small hints of it. Like there's a bit. I think there's some point where John Pertwee refers to the TARDIS, as a her or the old girl or something like that. So it's hinted at, but I don't think it's explicitly explored until the revival series. So
right,
yeah, but now that you've brought up the ending, I do actually want to talk about that. That is a very fun ending for me.
yeah.
In a way, it's quite emotionally devastating. Like I was kind of
Oh yeah,
shocked.
absolutely.
I was shocked more the second time I watched this episode, but like when the monk is just saying "Doctor, Doctor," and he's just sitting there crumpled in a heap, I'm like, that's pretty, that's pretty full on, Doctor. Like, man,
Well, it's something that I don't think the Doctor would do today,
well,
because like the monk isn't a particularly malicious character. I
yeah,
think that like especially early on when the Doctor seems to have like a somewhat more respect for the Time Lords than they do now.
mm,
Certainly,
mm,
the fact that he seems to be like genuinely disgusted that the Time Meddler is messing with time.
yeah,
I don't think the Doctor would care as much now. I think they would be more concerned with we have to stop the murder and
mm-hmm,
not we have to stop him from messing with time anymore.
mm-hmm,
I think they would have found a different way to resolve it now, but I think because this is an older series and that Time Lord law hasn't been established yet,
mm,
I kind of like this take on the Doctor, and especially knowing that their trust and faith in the Time Lords as a society is going to get beaten into
yeah,
the dirt
trampled
and
into the ground.
crushed until the Doctor has absolutely no trust for them. But
Um,
then is later surprised that they would lie when they become the
yeah,
13th Doctor and out of
yeah.
character.
I was funny. I assume you going off of JXI's video, The Fall of Doctor Who, because
Yep.
I watched that the other day.
Yeah, yeah.
And Jay pointed that out in the video. I'm like, yeah, actually, that's kind of weird that the 13th Doctor would say, why would they lie? This is the same
Do you
character.
know the Time Lords?
This is the same character
Chibnall?
who with in Trial of a Time Lord, where he said you're the most corrupt civilization in all of history. 10 million years, that's what it takes to be really corrupt. So anyway,
It's almost like the more you know about Doctor Who, the worse that era becomes.
yeah, funny how that works. But it's funny though, comparing this to Father's Day. You said you had a problem with the fact that they don't show any like major consequences for Rose messing the timeline and putting people's lives at risks. Well, they definitely do here because the monk is
Oh yeah.
left alone for, and he wasn't even. Oh no, I mean he was doing bad stuff. He was going to kill a bunch of people, but like it's way more ruthless than the way the Doctor treats Rose, and even more ruthless than the Doctor treats Adam. It's like, yep, you're stuck in 1066. Fuck you. I might come back and save you, but for now, you're gonna sit there and rot.
Mm.
So it's
You'll
pretty
rot, and you'll rot until you reach old age, which for a Time Lord is
never
centuries, and
until
then you'll regenerate, and then you'll continue to rot.
until I've decided you've learned your lesson. Then you're
Yeah.
gonna come out of the naughty monastery. That's what's gonna happen. It's funny.
Yeah, it. I think it's like we know that the Doctor has that kind of rage within him.
And it's weird though. It's literally because he crumbles up in this corner. It's literally like the Doctor's just put him in the naughty corner for God knows how many centuries. It in a way it would be kind of fucked up if it wasn't funny. It's framed in
Yeah,
quite a
yeah.
humorous way. Now, having said that, from memory, the Doctor in this era, beyond the crotchetiness and the crankiness, he is actually quite an asshole. There's one
Well,
bit
yeah.
in the Daleks where he because they've landed on Skaro, which is a radioactive rock at this point of petrified jungles and mutation and whatever. And he says, oh, we have to check the atmosphere to see if it's safe, and he's got this little meter to detect how much radiation's in the air. They go off to explore. The meter says it's fine, but then after they leave, they show a close up to the little radiation meter, and it starts to creep up to danger levels. And I might be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that it's revealed the Doctor deliberately sabotaged that mechanism just so they could go exploring. And I'm like, wow, that's a really shitty thing to
Okay.
do.
Jesus Christ.
But yeah, I think again, it's kind of like what I said with the chase. I wonder if it's just these sort of blind alleyways of development that they were just sort of doing, just throwing random stuff at the wall to see what would stick.
It might be, yeah.
Mm.
But like I said, we do know that the Doctor has that rage within them.
Yeah,
Famously, at the end
yeah,
of
they do.
The Family of Blood,
Yeah,
where they describe how the horrific ways in which the Doctor subjects the family to endless torture
yeah,
because he's been pushed to his limits.
yeah,
And I think this is a nice way of. Obviously, this isn't deliberate foreshadowing to an episode
yeah.
from 2008, literally
Hmm.
like 43 years down the track.
Yeah,
But I kind of like that sort of internal consistency with the character.
yeah. The
Where
fact that there's a care there.
well, there's a
So the
care, but also the fact that they do have their own limits, and if those limits are pushed or tested, they will, do pretty
Yeah,
insane, ruthless
yeah,
things
like
by their
what
standards.
David Tennant says. No second chances.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. You could argue maybe that they did the Doctor really give the monk a first chance, or did he just say, "You've been messing around with time, fuck you"? He might have said it. He might have said, "You have a chance to stop this," but
I
certainly
don't
by
think
the
he.
end, when the monk says, "No, I'm still going to do it," the Doctor ruins his life. So, and it goes back
Yeah, no,
again to that sense of humor that
I don't
Hartnell
think.
has.
Yeah, look, I don't think the Doctor ever explicitly says to the monk, you know, you can put a stop to this now. Help us out with the Vikings or whatever.
Yeah.
But there are clearly several opportunities for the monk to
Yeah,
not
to
do that.
stop it, and he does say um, I'm pretty sure he does say, you can't mess around with the timeline.
Yeah.
So
There is that explicit thing.
so the opportunity, the chance was there, but the
Yeah.
monk just didn't take it. He called the Doctor's bluff, And he has a lot of kind of arrogance in the end when he's reading the note. Again, that it was kind of one of those moments where I don't know if I'd say it was like a needless bit of exposition, but the fact that he's reading the whole note out aloud, and there's one really weird bit with his performance where he just pauses. He takes this really long pause to kind of look around, and he's kind of just taking in his own ego is like, oh, I'm so clever, but he's not saying anything. That was such a strange moment for me. But the fact that he reads the note and he says, oh yeah, um, oh, he can't mess with my machine, ha ha ha. That kind of arrogance of him, and that's what is led to his downfall. And it gets back, I think, those little small quirks. It gets back to the charm I see in classic Who, because I can't totally ignore it. And certainly, if you're a modern Who fan and see something like that, you think, do I really find that convincing? I don't blame you if you feel that way, but I find that just kind of a charming quirk. It's very enjoyable watching those moments for me.
Yeah, but you obviously can't do the first Doctor narrating the message as the monk is reading it, as you would probably do today with something like that.
You probably theoretically could have if they just recorded his dialogue and post.
Yeah,
but it wouldn't have been
that level of they don't have that much of a budget, and I don't think they, especially if William Hartnell was on holiday for a significant chunk of this episode,
which is funny though because there's that one line in I think he has one line in episode 2, but it's clearly ADR. They've clearly just recorded it beforehand, so it's just funny. That's all.
Anything else? Do we want to wrap this one up?
I think so. I don't think there's much else to say apart from I had my feelings towards it aren't super positive, but they're more positive now that we've discussed it. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah. I'm gonna give this episode a solid 7. I think it's quite good. There are some flaws with it. It's kind of slow at places. But what it does good, it does really, really good.
Yeah,
and I think that it's a good showing for William Hartnell when he's there.
It's tough, because I do broadly agree with you, but then I think I also gave the Happiness Patrol a 6, so I just think to myself, and I enjoyed that more, I think I'm gonna give this one a 6, for me. Because the flaws, for me, they are a bit hard to ignore. It does get very slow in places, but as you say, the bits, when it's good, it's really, really good. So yeah, I hope I don't regret saying this, but yes, I'm going to give it a 6 for me.
Cool. Well, that's another discussion. Tune in next week when we'll be looking at the 2-part story, The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances.
It'll be super spooky.
It sure will. It's one of the highest rated Ninth Doctor stories. Some call it their favourite Doctor Who story ever.
Not
it
surprising.
Introduces Captain Jack Harkness to the series. It's another 2-part. I'm looking forward to next week's discussion very much. It'll be fun to rewatch that episode again. Until then, I'm Alex.
And I'm Fitz, and may your Viking fleets sail off into the broad horizons.
You took my outro spot.